Grab your fire extinguishers because it was officially a Monday night barn burner at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Listen in as long as you can before one of us gets sent off by Michael Oliver. It's Monday the 6th of November and this is Ramble Reacts. I'm Luke Moore.
And I'm Vidushan Huntaraja.
Yes, indeed. Vish, sometimes we do a Ramble Reacts episode. I'm thinking, what on earth are we going to talk about now? And Chelsea 2, Fulham 0 from a few weeks ago springs to mind. It's safe to say that was not the case here. I now have the opposite feeling, namely I hope that we managed to remember everything that happened and managed to fit it all into this episode, because I don't know about you, but I feel like it was actually quite remarkable that the players were able to fit so much into a 90-minute game. So if you'll allow me, very, very quickly, I'll be as brief as I can. This is only going to barely scratch the surface of what happened, but just for admin purposes, the game finished Tottenham 1, Chelsea 4. Spurs opened the scoring through a deflected Dejan Kulusevski goal before Cole Palmer equalised for the visitors from the penalty spot after a frankly atrocious challenge from Sergio Romero. I mean, what was he doing? It saw him be sent off. It's always the ones you least expect, isn't it? Shortly after half-time, Destiny Udogie also saw red. Then Nicholas Jackson added a hat-trick to seal the deal for Chelsea following Spurs' hugely entertaining but basically suicidal decision to continue playing a high line and offside trap, which Chelsea then just kind of had loads of practice at springing over and over again. But as I said, the final score and the goal scorers only really go halfway to describing what happened. There were goals, red cards, many injuries actually, chances, on-pitch bust-ups, the most ridiculous offside trap I've ever seen, as I said, and much more in what has to be the most dramatic game between these two sides since the last one in 2016, the Battle of the Bridge. I mean, it was breathless stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know where to start with that. It felt like the combination of every type of discourse we've had around these two teams and the Premier League. And I suppose primarily I'm focusing on VAR because it featured prominently throughout the game, really, but specifically in that first half.
Yeah.
I also like the idea that, we've made this point before, but, with every VAR check, it sets the game on a different path. So, there were multiple different strands of this game out there in different universes, and the one we're in, Nicholas Jackson has a hat trick.
yeah,
and that's not the maddest one.
It's like a Doctor Strange movie.
Yeah,
We'll pop. Someone, Nicholas Jackson's going to pop out of a mirror, like a portal in my living room in a minute, and start doing my washing up. I mean, on the VAR thing, we won't do too much on VAR because I think it's boring for people, and this is supposed to be a reactive episode. But just if I may just say one thing, I mean, to put into context what you're saying there, I mean, it's been reported, I didn't time it personally myself, but it's been reported that there were 9 minutes of the first half taken up by VAR and 17 minutes in total. And of course, the clock doesn't stop, right? So
yeah,
that is really VAR playing a huge amount of, playing a huge part in the game, more than really, most players probably in terms of how much of a contribution they make in terms of a minutage. So it was a very, very, kind of intrusive performance by VAR, I think is the right word for it. And what's really interesting is if you say you don't know where you want to start, let's start at the beginning then, because Spurs flew out the blocks. They were brilliant to start with. They scored the goal. The goal was fortunate, but the build-up to the goal was sensational. I mean, it was a fortunate deflection, but the build-up was amazing. They pulled Chelsea all over the place, and it was like more of the same. It was almost a bit like, is this Spurs team going to continue to just be this juggernaut? And then they just quite weirdly, completely relinquished control of it. Like the Romero, as we said, he got sent off, and we'll talk a bit about that, but he could have been sent off before that. There was a lot of rashness going on for no real discernible reason, and it gave Chelsea an opportunity, didn't it?
Yeah, massively so. I mean, to start at the beginning there, yeah, you're right. Like the pace of Spurs' play at the start was brilliant, and obviously it wasn't just the play, but it was just how clear they were in their passing and movement. Like the goal, as you said, was pretty scatty. But if you think of Maddison's pass from the left back position that opened up the entire other side of the field, and it wasn't like a raking cross field pass or anything. He was basically playing the ball to the edge of the centre circle in Chelsea's half, and it seemed to break them open. And then even the Song Heung-min disallowed goal for offside, which was rightly disallowed.
Marginal, yeah. Brilliant move again.
Yeah, and again from a similar thing, but from the other side, where Destiny Udogie ends up picking up the ball in a similar position to where Maddison played that ball for the goal, but on the on the mirror image side, if you will. But it was Udogie's double-footed challenge on Sterling that Sterling got out of the way of, and Udogie only got away with a yellow card. That was obviously the first yellow for his sending off. But I mean, he could have been sent off then and there. And that was the moment Spurs seemed to. Yeah, I mean, they lost their heads, really. It didn't really make any sense because they were all over Chelsea, and something about, I don't know, something about that moment, or maybe it would have happened without it, but it really felt like they lost. It felt like they lost the thread of the game that they had worked so hard and done so well to set up, really, because that should have just been one-way traffic for the first half.
Yeah, I mean, the first half an hour, basically, Kulusevski scores after 6 minutes, and you talk about the Son goal. And at that point, Spurs are flying. And then I think it's 18 minutes that Udogie avoids the red card. I mean, people will have their own opinions on that. I mean, it's 2-footed, it's off the ground, it was reasonable. He was going at a reasonable clip, I suppose. I mean, that's another controversial one that we could discuss endlessly. I don't propose we do that, but we could have done. Then Romero, a few minutes after that. Then there's a Sterling goal, which is ruled out for handball right away after that. And then the Caicedo thing is 5 minutes later. So at 28 minutes, you've got Caicedo shooting from miles out. I thought the offside decision was kind of glossed over a bit. I'm not sure that was an offside, given that how far away he was from the goalkeeper when he was judged to be offside for kind of obscuring the view. But nevertheless, I mean, it didn't really matter because ultimately Romero took matters into his own hands, like he's some kind of like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando, just going to kill every Chelsea player one by one. And then obviously, Cole Palmer just about squeezes the penalty, and it was actually unfortunate. Vicari had an absolutely brilliant game. I mean, he has been on a personal mission to prove me wrong. I saw him play twice in pre-season, right? Just bored, not really much happening. So I had the Spurs pre-season games online, just watching them. He was like really dodgy. He looked like, oh my God, he's like an absolute car crash waiting to happen. He has been magnificent ever since. And he almost saved that penalty, but he didn't. It's just an incredible game to process. And then obviously, going into the injury time of the first half, Mickey van der Ven, who's been a really big player for Spurs, he obviously pulls a hamstring. That looked like quite a nasty one. Maddison went off as well, which, I mean, and I want to come on to a bit about what that means for Spurs. But before I go too far down the rabbit hole into half-time, have you got anything to say about the Romero challenge?
Well, the thing about it was like it was an act of clearly an act of desperation, whereby he actually, the fact that he gets to the ball first is great, and then it just carries on with the motion, which Gary Neville was saying on comms as a defender, and I think Carragher mentioned it too at half time, that as defenders, they know better than anyone that even in the rough and tumble of the Premier League, you can stop yourself from doing that. But the stupidest thing about it was, he gets away with that kick, which also we forget is in the same move as the Sterling disallowed goal. So the game, it's all happening.
Air kick, right? Yeah.
And it just seemed really boneheaded as well. And like, so because of the nature of that red card, it's the next 3 games out. And so those 3 games are Wolves, Villa, and Man City at the end of that. That's the third one there. And then with Mickey van der Ven's injury, that's a whole new, pair of centre-backs for Spurs for the month of November, essentially. Who knows how long he's going to be out for. But also I know you, and this is merely me speculating, but, you're right, we shouldn't talk about VAR too much because it was only a small, despite taking a few minutes out of the first half, it was very much a small part in how things transpired, because I think broadly all the decisions that were made eventually were correct. But I do wonder about the stop-start nature of that first half and the nature of Van der Ven, pulling his hamstring when going for a sprint with Jackson, because as we know, it's those downtime moments that come as a surprise that often are quite hard to go back up to. So
it's a great point, and it's not one that's mentioned that often. The one that is mentioned is, of course, when a player goes through on goal and the assistant referee doesn't flag till later. The player could pull a hamstring there. Yeah, but you're right to say that the stop-start nature of VAR means surely that those injuries are far more likely to happen. And I just felt like I go and see Spurs a fair amount, and when they're at their best, Yeah, Romero is responsible for starting up a lot of their attacks. They really miss him when he's not there. He's a much more important player than just being a centre back, if that makes sense. But he's always had this, and the right word you use there is boneheaded. He's always had like almost like a lack of like human empathy for his fellow pro, right? And he's also so rash. Like he can't. He's got like a real nastiness about him, which I guess can be a strength, right? The same way you saw like Virgil van Dijk's got a nastiness. He's like no nonsense. You see Virgil van Dijk in the tunnel sometimes, and you think, fucking hell, wouldn't like to be on the wrong end of you, kind of thing. But he seems to be able to control it for the most part. I mean, Romero, this is a pattern of behaviour. This is not like, he always reminds me of a guy who used to, just bear with me here. There's a guy I used to work with, used to cycle into work every day, and he used to cycle across London, right? And you just knew he was one of these lycra types who just took all the risks with the traffic and stuff like that, right? And I think the period of time I worked with him across a number of years, he must have been knocked off his bike maybe 5, 6, 7 times. And every time he'd go, oh yeah, fucking car drivers and stuff. And you end up just thinking, can it really be? I mean, you really that unlucky, right? It's a pattern of behaviour. You must be responsible for this. So say with Romero, what's that? His 4th, 5th red card? Must get sent off on average once every 15, 20 games.
I think it. You know what? I think it is that. I think it's right in that sweet spot. I think I saw someone tweet that it's once every 17 games. So
if you're getting that nature of red card, and as you say, you're getting a three game ban, you're missing a decent percentage of games. And for Spurs, they're flying at the moment. I mean, this may not derail their kind of their momentum just because of the nature of it, and maybe we can speak a bit about that later. But it isn't ideal because the drop off between their first 11 and then some of the players that are coming through to replace players who aren't available is a little bit problematic in various positions. So I don't know. I wonder whether a manager has to just take a decision with a player like Romero to say, look, these are the pros, these are the cons. And you just you notch it up and just see whether you want to take the rough with the smooth, I suppose. And one thing I would say as well is when they replayed the decision on the big screen in the Spurs stadium, if you are listening to this episode and are one of those Spurs fans in the stadium that booed that decision, listen up. This is aimed directly at you. You do not know or understand the laws of the game. It's simple as that. It's never been the case, I don't think, and if it hasn't been for a very long time, that you play the ball and that's fine. That's not how it works. It's irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant. And if you don't think that's a red card, I've got a bridge to sell you, because it was a red card all day long.
The thing you say about Romero and the pattern of behaviour, I think Spurs fans will be the first to agree with you there, because in part it was always seen as a bit of a strength. Like, I've got a few mates who are Spurs fans and they love Romero unequivocally.
Oh, I would love him. I think I would. Yeah.
And a lot of the time it comes from doing those little niggly things that he actually often gets away with when you think about it. Like, he started this season really well, not just from a performance point of view, but also keeping that part of him in check. And I suppose at his best, he gets away with the niggly things, and at his worst, he does something manic like that. He's like both Kray twins.
yeah.
Like and today, we saw Reggie Kray, I think. So,
I don't know. Yeah, I don't think either of them were that nice.
No, but one was more of a wrong than the other, and we saw that version tonight.
Yeah, I think that's right. And he as we said, it's a consistent thing with him. But I mean, if you're talking about why Spurs fans perhaps love him and why football fans love a player like that playing for their team, I think it's because there's a nature of Spurs, if you go back a little bit further, where they've been a bit soft-centred. And I think, you could talk about how many games Romero misses through suspension or the silly decisions he makes, but at least ensures that, he's going to lead a bit by example and that you're not going to be bullied, I think with him and with Basuma and with even Højbjerg comes in, or Bentancur when he comes back from injury, and there are other players as well, they're not really a team that will be bullied, I don't think, now.
Yeah.
And Romero's a big part of that. So you've got to acknowledge that there's a lot of positives to his game as well. But just in that situation, it's at that time of the game, it's in the penalty area, you're a goal ahead, it's just a bit boneheaded. And speaking of boneheaded, obviously, Udogie makes that challenge in the second half when he's already on a yellow. I mean, that was arguably a worse decision, given that he's very lucky to stay on the pitch anyway. he makes that decision 10 minutes into the second half when the game's still in the balance. You know, you're at home. You're down to 10 men, of course, but you're at home. It's not the end of the world. He wouldn't be the first team ever to see out a game. But before that, I just want to get a note from you on right at the end of the first half when Reece James avoided that red card for the elbow. Do you remember that was another decision? Like, you know, there was no point in this game where nothing happened.
Yeah,
every single time you looked up at the screen, something was happening. And the Reece James thing was a little bit controversial as well, wasn't it? There was just so much for the officials to do in this game.
Yeah, that was a weird one. That felt like obviously a very different action in itself. That felt broadly reminiscent of a few of the things we saw in the Arsenal-Newcastle game on the weekend.
Oh yeah, Jesus.
Like where I think I wondered if like a lot of it had to do with the VAR official trying to work out like the personality of the player and whether they'd see themselves as that kind of player. Because, yeah, he didn't need to be raising his arm there, much in the way that Guimaraes didn't need to be raising his arm at that point in the first half of the Arsenal game. But yeah, no, I just... It happened... I can't remember the exact time, but it happened after everything else had happened in that first half. And I imagine the people at Stockley Park were like, look, let's just get to half-time. Let's just pass. There's already 7 minutes of added time now.
We don't get paid extra. We don't get paid by decision. You know, they're not getting any extra for that, you know.
My parking runs out on Wednesday. Come on.
and it was more of the same in the second half, right? So we mentioned Udogie then. He's been great. Like, he's been really good. He's like been a revelation for Spurs.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's two players who've actually been very good this season who've just had really stupid moments that have cost Spurs. And
I think you know, they carry on playing the way. I mean, it was basically like Limmy, wasn't it? It was like don't back down, double down. Like they were still playing this way. Spurs basically said to themselves, "We're still going to play this way. We're going to make the changes we need to make." And then they ended up with this like a preposterous 9-men team of the back four was Højbjerg at one point, Dyer, Pedro Porro, and Emerson Royale at left back, with Skip, Basuma, and a half-fit Bentancur in front of them. And then they just played this, and I saw you tweeted a screenshot of it. They played, and it's a remarkable screenshot. But for people listening to this, go and check out Vish's Twitter and look at that screenshot, because they're all playing in a single line on the halfway line and
it's
basically inviting Chelsea to completely spring them over and over again. And then Vicario just races out 100 metres in 10 seconds flat and cleans up the ball over and over again, and of course, and it worked, and everyone loved it on Twitter, and Gary Neville loved it, until it stopped working, which it was always going to happen, and then it stopped working again and again and again.
Yeah, it was like a NFL defensive line. You're like, right,
it was exactly like that.
They're going to rush the quarterback here. This is what they're
no
doing.
Secondary, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was absurd, really. And I mean, I tried to convince myself that it was a smart thing to do, but actually, and obviously because of how it played out, there's an element of me being wise after the event here. But it felt like if you're going to ask a team who have struggled creatively to do anything noteworthy, if you're going to ask them instead to try and work out how they can get the ball over, as you said, over one line entirely, and get their fast players, of which Chelsea have many fast players, to basically go down one side and cut it back to someone else, they're going to work that out, and they did work that out.
Even with Nicholas Jackson, who kept mistiming his run every single time and had to get Sterling or someone else out wide to spring for him so he could just have the ball cut back and put in the net.
Yeah. But even as that played out over and over again, you were just like, look, just going on probability alone, like this is going to work out for them. For Chelsea, that is.
Yeah.
Like, it just is.
And then Spurs just kept attacking as well.
Yeah. I mean... Yeah, obviously we've started recording before the post-match press conference, and we'll probably not actually get an answer until maybe the embargo stuff that comes out tomorrow, and people pour through the wreckage of that game. But I did wonder if maybe he thought, if maybe Postecoglou's thought there was, well, this is how we normally play, and we can't just sit back. We're not really a team that sits back and defend, because maybe we're not particularly good at that, and certainly the players at Spurs hold on the end there, Eric Dyer and Højbjerg, they've tried to do that before under previous managers, so they've not been able to do it.
Yeah, I've got a quote here from Ange on this exact thing. I saw it producer Rory has kindly put it in the running order for us. And he says, I mean, it's very hard for me to read this without putting an Australian accent on. He said, "It is just who we are, mate. It's who we are and who we will be for as long as I'm here. If we go down to 5 men, we're going to have a go." So he's basically saying if we get 6 players sent off, at which point I think the game is, under the laws of the game, would be abandoned anyway.
Well, they can still play on if they want to.
If we go to 5 men, we choose to play on and we choose to keep attacking. And that is actually, it sounds frivolous and it sounds like, and it is funny, obviously, because he is inherently quite a funny bloke. But that does speak to something a bit wider and a bit bigger than that. And what I was just going to say before we had that Ange quote dropped in there is just that I think it's an amazing credit to the coaching staff that the players will continue to play in the way they're coached, even under that kind of duress, because the natural instinct for anyone generally is to drop deep. It's safer to do that. You feel much more comfortable doing that with the game in front of you all the time. You're not turning around running back towards your own goal, which a lot of defensive players don't like. And so I actually would take an awful lot of credit if I was a coaching team for Spurs on that stuff. And ultimately, really, I mean, we'll never know, but I mean, if they dropped deep and they kind of played the whole game in their own third, they probably would have lost the game anyway. And so it doesn't really matter. And don't forget, 2-1 down, Eric Dyer is probably what? A hair away from scoring one of the greatest equalisers that stadium's seen. Right, I felt so bad for him because he's had a tough time. He's not getting picked, and he absolutely controlled that volley because he's actually got quite a lot of technique, Eric Dyer, for the position he plays. I felt so bad for him, didn't you? I was really desperate for that to be a goal.
Yeah, no, massively. Yeah, you're right. Like he's probably quite underrated as a technician, because every now and again he's on free kicks. So like they obviously know, or he obviously does have a good shot on him. I want to go back to what you were saying, though, about credit to the coaching staff, because I'm inclined to agree with that, because you think even as a professional playing at that level, there'll be an element of pride and through pride, self-preservation that comes into play there. Like, we don't want to be battered. We don't want to be battered. It'd be safer if we drop back and stuff like that. But as you say, like, they kept going and like going into that halftime break, that's the toughest situation that Postecoglou's been under in his Spurs tenure so far, and it's obviously still very young, only a few months. But the next big thing was always going to be this post-match, his post-match comments from this after this, and maybe it's a bit of a free hit because you're 9 men, and also, when Jackson scores what was the third goal, Chelsea were cheering. Obviously, they knew they'd won the game. Right after the Dyer disallowed goal, Spurs fans were clapping, and so it's not just. I suppose it's not just the players, and there'll be some Spurs fans who leave that game thinking, "What the hell were we playing at?" There's some even at half time who were kind of, certainly on my feed, Spurs fans that I follow being like, "Right, this is done. This is really stupid, but this is done." But just the broader feeling around that club, and it may be different if the Romero suspension, the Van de Ven injury, and we don't know what Maddison's situation is with his injury when he had to go off. If that ends up, scuppering their November, which isn't as populated as the teams around them because they're not in Europe. But, if that ends up being something that fucks up, then they can look at this game and think, God, we've really let slip there. But here and now, and when they wake up tomorrow, there'll be an element of like, geez, that was fun.
It just goes to show you the feeling around the club, right? Because ultimately, on paper, you write it down on paper, you're at home against a rival team, you've had a great start to the season, and then 2 of your players make more than one dreadful decision to completely ruin any chance you've got of winning the game. Yet it feels like, like you say, the dust will settle. But at the moment, as we record this, it feels like there's still great feeling at Spurs. Chelsea still got a bit of convincing to do because they toiled, and it seems crazy because they won the game 4-1 away from home against a team who hadn't lost a game yet this season. But it still doesn't feel like all is right in the Chelsea camp either. And we haven't spoken about Chelsea, so we should probably speak about them for a wee bit at least. It's another good result for them. I mean, ultimately, I was really surprised and interested to see that before the game, Monday Night Football ran a little infographic. I don't know if you saw it, and it showed that for XG for and XG against, Chelsea's record is actually better than Spurs'. right? Yet Spurs at the time were sitting in second. Well, they still do sit second in the league, and Chelsea are now up to 10th. And there's been a feeling, certainly around our parish, from different people that we've had on the show, from the gang, that Chelsea are better than they've shown, and they did a very professional job last time I saw them in person, which was at Craven Cottage. What did you make of them? Because the feeling at the moment, like I say, is like they toiled a bit and it wasn't really convincing from there. And Nicholas Jackson needed 4 million chances to score 3 open goals. He missed a couple of really easy chances before that, by the way. Yet they emerged 4-1 winners against a rival.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know that you could extrapolate. Well, certainly I can't extrapolate too much from this game from them. Because
yeah, I feel the same because it's like a bit of a write-off, right?
Yeah. Like, Cole Palmer was impressive, but he has been impressive. I thought James was good in patches. I still think they... Well, yeah, I mean, I still think they don't really know what they are. Like, the most convincing passage of play happened to follow one of their biggest capitulations again, in the Arsenal game. Like, so... I'd probably take more from that, from the point where they were 2-0 up against Arsenal at Stamford Bridge than anything here. But, I mean, they've come away with a win. I feel like they got over, not that it really affected them or would have affected them as a team, but I thought because of the nature of the game, we've kind of, Pochettino's return to Chelsea was then and gone. It was like it was all pre-match and then nothing at all in the game itself. So, yeah, like I wonder how because, even by the third goal... Pochettino was still berating his team. There still seems a bit of a disconnect in terms of what he wants from them and what he's getting from them.
Yeah.
And I don't think today would have helped at all, really.
No, I thought Spurs seemed really, because of the reasons we've just talked about, even though they were down to 9 men, far more coherent unit. I mean, the job that the coaching team at Spurs have done in such a short amount of time, based on a team that finished 8th, I think it was last season, and the feeling around the club was just abysmal. To be able to kind of pick that up so quickly, and I think because of the attitude around the club and because of the way Postecoglou does things, they won't think about this again for a second, I don't reckon. And it is a big challenge, but I don't think he'll treat it like it's one. I think he'll kind of breeze through it. And when you talked about how it's the biggest issue he's faced since being Spurs boss, I mean, I think that's the first home game he's lost as a coach for over 50 games. Right. So it's a long old time. So the reaction will, of course, be interesting. But going back to the Chelsea side of it, I mean, I'm always of the opinion when you get into it, you look forward to a big game like this against two good teams, really. And then there's a sending off, particularly an early sending off. I kind of, as someone who has to cover the games and talk about them, I tend to kind of relax a bit because I think, well, you can't read too much into it because neither team has been able to engage in the challenge that they expected to. And particularly when you get 2 players sent off, it just becomes a bit of a free hit for everyone, including people watching, right? So I don't think there's too much to read into it necessarily. I just think it's a weird situation that Chelsea will win 4-1 away from home. They may not take a huge amount of confidence from it just because for the first 20 minutes or so after the Spurs went down to 9 men, they kind of looked a bit confused. They kind of looked a bit like, they didn't really know what was expected of them, which I think is quite an odd thing to say. They kept falling into that trap over and over again until they eventually worked it out. And they'll take the win and then move on, of course. But it was a very, very odd night, a very entertaining night for us neutrals, Vish. I also, by the way, just to change tack slightly, did you hear that weird thing Gary Neville said about having a parrot on each shoulder? I just remembered that. Just came to me. What the fuck was he talking about?
There was a red parrot. Sorry, was there a red parrot and a blue parrot, or was it a white parrot?
I think he was trying to say the whole thing about the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other.
Yeah.
But he got confused. And
he's not a religious man, so he said, I'll do parrots then. Yeah.
I'd love it if they cut to him and he did literally have a parrot on each shoulder, giving him his life.
Just pecking at his ear.
Yeah. Oh. And I know this is rich coming from me, but as a co-commentator, he never stops talking.
No, but I think that came up somewhere, maybe on the show, actually, but it feels like that's generally the nature of it. Like, I feel like broadcasters are trying to work out, you know how BT seem to have 6 people on a broadcast, or specifically commentating on the game, and people fly, and you can call in to BT, and there's a chance I'll put you on air with Fletch.
Not me. That's true of most people, but not me.
Yeah, fair. But it feels like with Sky, they're like there is a constant dialogue there. I thought this game warranted it. I thought this game was better for it because it was, I think Neville and Carragher are two very good pundits. I thought Sturridge today was brilliant as well.
Yeah, he's great.
But I quite like it that people
charisma.
who do their prep, who've been in the game for so long, can still have moments like us sat at home where they're like, honestly, mate, not a clue, not a Scooby. What's going on here?
Yeah. I think I'd also take a huge amount of credit if I was a Spurs fan and a lot of joy from the idea that based on that Ange statement that he's put out, our team has never been less likely to release an ill-advised statement. There's no way under the Postecoglou reign they're ever going to be releasing stupid statements as a club, and that's the phase we're at now because we've seen Liverpool do it, we've seen Arsenal do it. I know Pete's spoken a lot about how clubs should have a limited amount of pieces of paper they're allowed to release statements on across the season. I just don't think Spurs are ever going to release a statement under Ange. I just don't think he'll let them.
Yeah, I think that he's more likely to rock up to Stockley Park with a six-pack.
Big time.
And be like, look, let's talk this through.
That sounds vaguely threatening.
Yeah.
I think if he didn't pound it straight away, he wouldn't like you.
No, I don't think he's that. I think it's even a beer as shit as VB is there to be savoured. You shouldn't waste beer.
Oh, yeah.
I think he's very much from that school of it.
Oh, no, that's very much based on your Instagram activity. That's very much your policy as well, Vish.
You shouldn't waste a good beer. Should never glug a good beer.
No, I always sip a lovely beer. Never glug it. Next up is for Spurs. I've said we can't really analyse this too much, but while we're here, we might as well just do a little bit of what's coming next. It'll be Spurs away at Wolves on Saturday lunchtime. Chelsea, interestingly, are the final game of the weekend this weekend at home to Manchester City. What do you extrapolate from what happened tonight, if anything, ahead of those two games?
Well, I think to speak a bit more on Chelsea, because I suppose we haven't done too much. The fact that game's at home against Man City is big. I think it's hard to kind of take an away crowd and implant it into like a home atmosphere. It's never quite the same. The away support is always much better. And they were very loud and very they kind of bought into the vibe of the game, which I think is quite important, especially like from an enjoyment point of view, both for them and I suppose us neutrals. But I think that's quite a good game for them to have up next. There's who knows what this is from. Let's try and take some of that chaotic energy and channel it there because they've got Newcastle as well after that, and then Brighton at home, and then Manchester United. They should be all right. But they
little week off for them.
Yeah, although that could end up being quite a ridiculous game between two teams who don't really know what they are. But like you think they'd go into that Man City game thinking, what the hell, because they've had 3 home games on the bounce coming into this. That Arsenal game, then losing to Brentford, and then just a League Cup game.
That was kind of their only really poor night at the office recently, though.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. I mean, because they responded for the Chelsea games, going away to Burnley and winning comfortably there. So, yeah, I think I just think that they'll probably set up with more or less the same team today. I think maybe I'm trying to look too much into it, but I felt like there were parts today where you saw how important their fullbacks are, just from getting them out of trouble, and it felt like a lot of the stuff they were trying early on was on their right side because of Cole Palmer and Reece James, and it felt like that gave them a bit more cutting edge because Sterling looked a little bit isolated every time he was out on the left. But again, I'm talking about 20 minutes on the game, but they're the same number of players on both sides.
It's really hard to judge.
Yeah,
and I think on staying with Chelsea, the Nicholas Jackson thing is interesting because he's a player who seems to miss a lot of chances. He's not been a laughingstock, so I think that's going too far to describe it.
But I don't think so.
I think he has been the victim of a lot of criticism, chiefly because most football fans have been like, Chelsea have spent X amount of money, they've got this guy up front, I've literally never heard of him, what's going on? Yet after tonight, it's interesting, isn't it, the narratives that get written around football, because now, as we sit here now, he scored exactly the same amount of league goals this season as Evan Ferguson and Ollie Watkins, who've been two kind of Premier League bays of the season so far, and he's done it in fewer minutes than Ollie Watkins, by the way. Many fewer minutes than Ollie Watkins. So that's an interesting thing. I suspect, though, having said what I've just said, it may well return to business as usual next time out. If he's got a defence to play against, I think it might be a bit harder for him. But on the Spurs side, as I mentioned, they play Wolves next, and I kind of banged the drum a lot about this, I suppose. But the interesting thing for Spurs, I think, given the start they've had, which is thrown into sharp focus now after this game and the players that they're going to have missing, is the drop-off is not ideal. Now, I think that someone like Højbjerg, for example, is a really good player to have around the club, and I thought he actually did okay when he played a full game recently. Again, it was a Fulham game at home. I think he played the whole game and he was decent, and they won the game. But he's clearly a drop-off from the players ahead of him in that midfield. And now they're going to do it, as you mentioned, for the foreseeable future without their two first-choice centre-backs. And those two players, if all was well, if there was no trouble at Mill, they'd be playing every game. And so that goes to show you that it could be an interesting situation against Wolves, because Wolves, as we've seen on occasion, are very, very capable. So it's an interesting situation, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and if you think about what we've been talking about Spurs this season and their qualities, it's been from moving the ball quickly, and players move the ball quickly when they're playing regularly, and they know exactly what to do and exactly where everyone is. And naturally, as well as that drop off, there is going to be little things like one of Højbjerg gets the ball on the turn and has to look left to know that someone's there, whereas like Maddison gets the ball and knows someone's there and plays that pass first time. And obviously, we talked about the drop-off in skill, but it's also just the awareness as well, and spending that much time out on the field with those players. And Van der Ven has been one of the signings of the season already, or certainly if we're judging it at this stage of the season. And it's the way he carries the ball out. It's his pace as well. He's so big, but he's so quick.
He's a big tank as well. Yeah, big tank.
And he's good with his feet. He's good on the turn, and they're going to be losing that as well. And we, as you said, Vicario was very good, but that's again a new challenge for him, isn't it? With a entirely new back, centre back pairing in front of him. So
Vicario could probably play centre back as well.
He tried. He definitely tried, didn't he? Basically, he did have the second half.
He made a couple of unbelievable saves as well. All right, Vish, I think that's just about as much time as we've got. I hope we managed to cover absolutely everything. It wasn't easy because so much happened, but thank you very much for listening. I think what we'll do is we'll give the very last word to the extraordinarily talented but not very articulate Cole Palmer, who simply said after the game, "It's easier playing against 9 men."
He's not wrong, is he? He's
not wrong. It's goodbye from Vish.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me as well. See you on Wednesday.
Cheers for watching another fantastic clip from the Football Ramble podcast. Make sure you click like on this video and subscribe to the channel, which means you will not miss a single upload.